Hello, I have Wren Quinn on the show. How are you today?
I'm good. Thank you for
Good.
having me today.
You're so welcome. Looking so cute in this Western wear that you have right now.
Thank
Mm,
you.
yeah.
It's good to see you. It's good to be here.
Mm. Well, I just like, and I'll be sharing this, or I did share, but by the time people are listening to this will be in the intro about how I found you and what your work did for me and how profound it was for me on my path of healing. Uh, but I want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your background and what brought you to not just somatic work, but specifically into breath work.
Yeah. I was thinking about that earlier today, actually, and usually what I say is, I'm Wren. I was in an abusive marriage, and it, brought me to discover this whole journey of discovering my own patterns and why I did the things that I did and how I could find the resolution that lies on the other side of it. But I really came into it because when I was married, my ex-husband was in the military, and so he had PTSD. And so when I started learning about trauma at all was because of my ex-husband, and I really wanted to find a way to help him, and I really wanted to find a way to understand him. And so I just, Googled like books that help with trauma, like what's happening, PTSD. I wasn't even really talking about trauma at all at that point. And so as I started to read these symptoms of PTSD and these the ways that they can manifest, I started realizing that like I have been traumatized. Like
Mm,
these things that I'm experiencing are trauma responses. And so just that awareness gave me what I needed to eventually file for divorce and to leave and to discover who I was outside of that cage.
mhm,
Um, so I had at that point been teaching yoga for a little while, and my yoga teacher was also a domestic violence survivor, and so she spoke often about just the horrors of domestic violence and how subtle they can be and the trickery that they can bring. And she would lead domestic violence or trauma informed yoga teacher trainings that centered around domestic violence. And so going to that, a portion of it was this breath work. And at the time, I had no idea that breath work could do anything like this. She was like, "We're going to do a breath work for 30 minutes." And I was like, "That's great. I love breath work. I love relaxing. I love peace." And so then we started it. And I was just like, "What is happening?" And I went through it, and it was just like I had never experienced anything that was like it before, and I had no idea that I could have that type of an experience just with my own body. And I had no idea that I had no idea all the things that were living inside my head and living inside my musculature, and just like that were telling me to do different things. They were guiding me, and
mm,
not always in positive ways. They were trauma tries to guide you, but it doesn't quite know how, especially if we don't know how to respond to it. So doing that breath work was life changing for me, because up until that point I had thought that the only way to move through trauma, well, I didn't think there was a way to move through the trauma. I thought there were ways to cope with it, and I thought there were ways to live with it, but I didn't really believe that you could just not be traumatized
mm,
anymore, if that makes
mhm.
sense.
Yeah.
I thought that the triggers would always be the triggers. You couldn't actually move on from them. You could just kind of tame them. And that was what I'd been trying to do. I'd been trying to like almost make them my pet, where it's like, okay, I know that I'm triggered, but I know how to calm down. Like it's okay. Like things are gonna be fine. But after going through that breath work the first time, it was the first time I went into a very specific memory with my ex-husband. And during the memory, I was able to leave instead of stay during that, during that traumatizing experience. And so then when I came back to the present moment, I went back to the memory and I remembered it again, but it was the first time that I'd remembered it without like a fear attached to it. It was
Mm,
kind of like a brain watching a movie, and it just completely shook the foundation of what I thought to be true. And it was like, if I can remember this and not feel a fear attached to it, then what else is possible? What else can I do?
wow.
And so then I didn't want to stop doing it. So I ended up going into yoga therapy, and it didn't have quite the spiritual component that I wanted it to have. So eventually I kept coming back to how transformative and empowering that breath work was. And I knew that I had to be able to share that with other people so that they knew that they didn't have to be stuck either.
Mhm.
And that if I, of all people, can do it, then you can do it too. And like we all have that, just learning that we all have that ability, and not even that we have the ability, but that it's our body's natural ability to resolve instead of subdue or instead of succumb. We're meant
Mhm.
to move through it, and we're meant for it to be something that is part of our past and not always
Right.
leading our present or shaping our future. It's there's so much more to it than that. And so I just knew that I had to do whatever it takes to make sure that people can feel that in their own bodies.
Yeah.
Um, and so there are this, I call it the alchemical breath because that's what it is for me. It's alchemization. And it reminds us that we are our own alchemists and we are our own magicians and our own, we're our own transformers. But
Yeah.
it's called lots of other things also. So, some of you might very well have done something similar or done, the same breath, but it's based on our own body's natural abilities. Um, there have been a couple people who've tried to trademark it, which I think is a little silly because you can't trademark breath. It's a truly incredible practice, no matter what it's called. Um, so yeah, that's how I came to the alchemical breath, and it's truly my favorite tool, um, especially for moving through something that's moving through times where we feel stuck, like in panic because we feel stuck.
Yeah.
It's just an astonishing powerhouse for empowerment and transfiguration.
It's true. It is. And I mean, for the listeners out there, I worked with Wren around the alchemical breath, and I had never done that before. And I was very much like you too, where it's like, yeah, breath work is fun and peaceful. And I just I had no idea what I was putting myself through. And especially like as it was happening, like, why am I doing this? Like, why do I have to like feel this stuff?
Mhm.
Um, and yeah, there was just like, kind of like what we were talking about earlier about like the masochist sort of like, like, oh, you gotta, it has to hurt in order to feel it or whatever. But it's in its way, and it's not hurtful for very long. But then something switches, something
Mhm.
just like happens, like after you're complete, and more so than talking about like the breath, which we're going to talk more about. I want to hear more from you around like what's actually happening in the body.
Mhm.
Um, but what's really beautiful about this work is that the intention of why I went in there to that session with you that day to work on a trauma, it wasn't an issue for me anymore after that.
Mhm.
It was
Yeah.
gone. I mean, the
Mhm.
memory was still there and I could reflect on the memory, but it was the first time that the memory wasn't charged.
Right.
And that was freedom,
Yeah.
complete freedom.
Yeah.
So I love this work that you're doing. So explain to us, because when we're talking about trauma, the and from what I've learned in my own somatic practices as well, the brain, it will put ourselves in like traumatic type instances because it wants to get it right. the
Mhm.
brain naturally wants to heal. And so it will find situations or experiences or people that are similar into that trauma, trauma bonding, because we're trying to get it right. We're trying to alchemize, like, to use your words, of what's going on. So tell us more about, I mean, the body's so miraculous that it knows how to do that, that it wants to do that. But what's actually happening to the brain and what's going on, that the breath is such a key and able to access that transmutation?
Yeah. Something that I talk about almost always when I talk about trauma and the alchemical breath, both separately or together, is that we have a part of our brain called the hippocampus. And so the hippocampus is responsible for storing and retrieving memory. And so it's a key player in our day to day life. And I kind of will think about it like, he's kind of like the accountant. He's kind of like the one who keeps things in order. And since since he's so responsible for day to day life, he has a big role when we're just experiencing like a normal routine. But the hippocampus is not as necessary for a survival need. So if we're in like something that our brain views as deadly or something that's something that's life threatening, our hippocampus goes offline and it's unable to tell the rest of our brain that we're not experiencing something that's life threatening. So if we were going to use like the example of like if you were bitten by a dog when you were a child, your hippocampus would respond a certain way. You'd run away, or you'd try to hide, or you would freeze, or you try to fight back maybe. But then your brain would log that as, okay, at this time this is what happened, this is what my body did. And so then 20 years later, if a dog is approaching you quickly, your amygdala and your thalamus start responding, and they start saying danger, 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 everybody go. And your hippocampus is kind of like running along after them and saying like, wait, this isn't the same thing, this is different. But your brain isn't able to hear it. So
Mm.
you're just being launched into a trauma response, into a fight, flight, or freeze response. And so then usually once it takes about, the hippocampus operates in the same time as our neocortex does. Our neocortex is responsible for conscious thought. So about the same time that the hippocampus is able to come online and say, hey, things are okay, this is different, that dog is not coming at you in the same way that it did when you were little, then but at that point you've already been filled with adrenaline. You've already like felt your body tense. And then usually our response is like anger at ourselves. It's like, why am I always overreacting? Like, why am I always
Mm.
doing this? Why can't I just be normal? Like, why can't I just, why couldn't I have done something different? But the truth is that we couldn't. When at all times of our life, we have the ability to make conscious decision, except for when we're in a trauma response.
Mm.
Because all our brain wants to do is keep us safe. And all our body wants to do is help us survive. And so it'll do whatever it takes, regardless of how rational that situation seems to us in the moment. But it's because of that, because of the hippocampus going offline, it's not able to recognize where we are in our timeline. So if we can consciously go into a trauma response or a fight, flight, or freeze response, then our hippocampus will still respond by going offline. But because it's not able to notice where we are in the timeline, if we were to go like back to that memory and in our minds respond differently, our body registers that the same way as if it happened in the current moment. So again, our hippocampus is a little fuzzy, but it goes back to that original memory, that original time, or that original sensation, and it marks it as resolved. And so if we didn't have that hippocampus going offline, we wouldn't have the same ability to resolve past things in the present. And so essentially that's what the alchemical breath does, that puts you into a conscious trauma response, which sounds really scary. And in the moment it's kind of scary. But it's also necessary so that we can go back and, like you said, get things right.
Mhm.
It's just kind of like keeps giving you this pen and is like, write the story different, like cross
Right.
those ones out and like write it different. and it gives you the ability to know. I feel like this is just as important. It gives you the ability to truly, truly know on a visceral, physical level that you can actually recover and
Mm.
surpass those things that were holding you back. And just having it, almost for me anyway, feels a little like empty at first, because you go back to that memory and you're expecting that strong sensation,
Yeah.
but instead it's just like, oh, it's not there anymore. It's
Yeah.
just a memory, and it's not something that's like clawing me and pulling me back. And you're right, there's a huge freedom in that, and there's a huge empowerment in knowing that that's possible to do on our own. We don't have to be hypnotized or you
Mm.
know given some type of like injection to get rid of these
Right.
things. It's something that you can do on your own for yourself. And doing the alchemical breath once doesn't resolve everything, but it will help you resolve some of those very core things that are hindering you from continuing to grow. And it's just like, getting those little bits figured out and understanding yourself a little bit more so that they don't have to be things that are obstacles for you. You can start moving with the fear instead of having it be something that's just caging you in.
Yeah.
It's there to help. And it doesn't feel like it's there to help when it's keeping us from enjoying our daily life or from getting closer to our friends or partners or family, because it feels like it's isolating us. But using that breath is another way to start moving with the sensations and moving with what your body is trying to tell you, and just getting to a place where you can just feel safe inside yourself.
Yeah.
Um, and it really, for me too, a large component was that it helped me to stop seeing my body as the enemy.
Mm.
It helped me stop seeing that I was crazy, or stopped feeling like I was crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Because especially when I was married, I would have these really intense just panic attacks. And I felt like I couldn't control anything that was happening around me or that was happening inside me. And I just remember like thinking like, I'm crazy. I can't control these thoughts and these feelings, so I must be crazy.
Mm.
And starting to work with the alchemical breath and using my body's sensations and triggers as allies was just entirely game changing, because then all of a sudden I wasn't trapped anymore. All of a sudden I had these things that were here to help me. And all of a sudden it was like, well, thanks, body. You're actually doing a lot of really cool things that you're giving me these gifts that I'm just rejecting.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so just, yeah, learning to move through it changed everything.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That's a
So
yeah, beautiful story. Good work. I'm so glad that it found you so
me
that you
too.
can
Sure.
um okay, and I mean you obviously are coming from a traumatic background within yourself, and you said that it helps on these core wounds. Do you like, if you were to go in, say, with a domestic violence, like, do you have to go in specifically to like a breath? Did you notice yourself going into a breathwork session with like each each memory that happened, or like before you felt like it was, eradicated from your system or alchemized from your system, or what did that look like for you?
I would say that there are benefits to both. So I've done this breath work before, especially like if I'm feeling a lot of anger, and I'm not having an outlet for it, then going into the breath work with that conscious desire to move with and through the anger can be really powerful. So going into it with like a targeted perspective can be helpful if you especially if you're feeling something in a present moment. Like if you know that you're feeling a lot of guilt or anger or grief, and you are able to in that moment go into a breath work, then it can be really powerful. um, but I feel like sometimes the problem with that is that then we're searching for the pain, and if we are planning to do a breath work about those things and we're not experiencing it in the moment, then it
Mm.
can kind of be dredging up. Um, Usually what I'll do is, especially when I facilitate them in groups or in individual sessions, is to kind of release your expectation, um, release that you have to guide yourself through this, or that you have to, like planning a trip. You don't have to plan the trip through it. You don't have to have, at 1 o'clock this happens, at 2 o'clock this. You don't have to have an agenda. You go into it trusting that your body knows what it's healing from, and you
Mm-hmm.
go into it knowing that your body has the tools that it's capable of using, and that it has the ability to just trust itself, truly, truly trust what your body is telling you, truly give it the opportunity to be listened to. Um, and that's often a cue that I'll give in the beginning, is to just look to your body and let it know that it's your body's turn to be heard. You're here
Mm-hmm.
to listen to it. And that gives just it gives your body the ability to be vulnerable with yourself. And I feel like that's something that we don't give our bodies as often as we think. We seek the ability to be vulnerable for others, but being vulnerable with ourselves is a different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so then it has the ability to be more fluid and to be more open. Um, and you can actually so oftentimes, I would say almost every time that I do something like this with a group or with an individual, they say, I thought I was coming into it with this, but what I really am going into is this other thing.
Mm-hmm.
And they didn't expect it. And it's usually so much simpler. And even to use an example of my own, this was probably 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and I was experiencing a lot of feelings of abandonment. I'd gone through a pregnancy, and my partner at that time had broken up with me during the pregnancy, and I just felt all of these just like crashing abandonments. And so I'm going to the breath work to work on my abandonment issues with that partner, and and what actually I came out of it with was, when I was in the breath work, I heard myself saying, like, I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. But I was apologizing to myself for abandoning myself,
Mm-hmm.
and for giving up so much of myself for that partnership, and for not being for me, the girl who needed the support. And it was like, it wasn't him that wasn't giving me the support. It was me that wasn't giving me the support. And it was just like everything just
Yeah.
crashed. And so that problem that I was trying to fix wasn't the problem. And if I had continued to stubbornly hold on to that idea that that was the problem, then I wouldn't have actually addressed the root that was causing me pain.
Mm-hmm.
So I really love the beauty that comes from, yeah, trusting your body and letting yourself know that you're here for it. You're here for yourself, and you're going to do the thing that it needs, not the thing that sometimes our ego is telling us that we
Mm-hmm.
need.
Yeah.
Uh, so yeah, I love the beauty of an open-ended. Um, 'Cause, yeah, you get the medicine that you need. We're not always
Absolutely.
asking for the right medicines. Sometimes we're asking for the wrong one, and then we're wondering why we're not getting better.
Yeah, that's true too. Um, I really appreciate like that perspective from your personal experience, and also just hearing from other clients that they go in with something specific and then something else comes up. And for me specifically, when I came in for you to work with you, I had a specific instance, and I that specific instance was there for the alchemy. But what was really interesting is that there were so many mm, things that had happened, and I thought that I was gonna like have to go through each and every single one. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like I saw, almost like, how they say when you die, your life flashes before your eyes.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was like going through the breath work, it was like the most recent memory of what had caused me pain from my partner at the time came up, and it went like so fast, like a domino effect, where it's like I saw all of the instances, but then the breath brought me to the first one,
Mm-hmm.
that first cut. And it was
Yeah.
like, oh, and that one wasn't even really the worst
Right.
one, but
Mm-hmm.
it was like the first time that like the trust was broken. And so it
Mhm.
was like, oh, like that was just like really interesting for me because it's like I was still working on what I came to work with, but it wasn't the specific instance that I thought I was
Right.
going there with.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, and that's part of it too, is that we, as the way that our like rational brains work is it puts everything on a scale, and it says this wasn't that bad, this was terrible, so that must be what it is. And sometimes it's just not. The fracture had already happened.
mhm.
And so even though that was like a big thing, if we can just go to that first one and rectify it,
Yeah.
then your life flashes in the opposite way. And I feel like that's what it's like for me. Then it's like everything kind of starts building back up in this rapid motion. It's like watching a flower, grow in one of those
Uh-huh.
rapid
Uh-huh.
camera shots. But whatever those are called. But yeah, so it's really cool. And in the moment, I think one of my favorite things about it is that when you're in the breath work, you are entirely in your body. You're
Mhm.
not using your conscious thinking brain, and that almost never happens.
Yeah.
And so it's like it can even give your brain just the permission to not be in the driver's seat for a little while. And it can let your body have just like that spotlight and just like that focus,
Mhm.
and just let it tell its story.
Yeah,
And then we get to understand ourselves a little bit better because we were able to do that. Um,
absolutely.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
letting the body lead the way, which is like why this subtle body speaks is here, is that I want to have more conversations. I'm fascinated by conversations like this of the foundation of the just the soma,
Mhm.
the subtle body is the somatic experience. And so to shut off our overthinking analytical brains and for our body to show the way, it's so efficient. It's so
Mhm.
efficient.
Yeah.
What is actually I'm sure some listeners are like, well, I'm breathing all the time, or yeah, I do like yoga nidra, or like I do certain sorts, like, I do box breathing. What type of breath is
Yeah.
happening that is working in the brain for the
Yeah.
um yeah.
So it's definitely not a relaxing breath work, but it works. And two inhales in, inhale out. And so I don't know if you'll be able to hear, but it's like so you're feeling like the center of your ribs, like where your diaphragm is. You're feeling sharp inhale there, sharp inhale at chest, full exhale out. And so it kind of goes in that rhythm of the and so what you're doing is you're starting to like accelerate. And so you're starting to, instead of trying to bring your awareness like down towards center, you're starting to kind of like bring your awareness like up. And usually as we're going through the breath work, I think about it as like going upwards through these ceilings. So the first couple minutes of the breath is challenging, and it's normal to kind of start feeling a little lightheaded or to feel a little bit dizzy. But it's really just your body getting used to the increased oxygen intake. Um, and what it starts doing is, like I said earlier, it takes you into a conscious trauma response.
Mhm.
And so the difference between this and a panic attack, because it does mimic if anybody on here has ever had a panic attack, just like like the feeling like
Mhm.
your
Mhm.
chest just like rising and rising. But it mimics that. But the difference is that you aren't being thrust into the breath. You're making a conscious effort to go into the breath with the intention of moving to the other side.
Mhm.
So it's like a harnessing. And the image I get often is like if it's really, really windy and you're trying to like put your head first through the wind and like walk through it, but you're just sliding backwards as you're trying to take these steps. Instead, if you just turn around and move with the wind, you can move so much more quickly and so much more easily. And the wind is there to help, to actually like to help carry you.
Yeah.
So once you begin to see the breath like that, then it's not as scary because then the fear isn't the obstacle.
Right.
The fear is the wind that's pulling you through. But like I was saying, so I usually see it as going through these ceilings. And so the first 10 minutes is the hardest part of the breath because you are going to go through trauma responses. You go through your the freeze response first, which is the reason that we even will carry trauma in our body. So if even if you're to think about like an instance of being frightened but being able to run from, like, successfully run and flee from the fear or from the thing that was causing the fear, then when you're done with it, you don't carry trauma in your body because you resolved it in the moment. Or even if you went into a fight response, if somebody attacked you and able to fight them off and just like kind of like overpower them, then you wouldn't carry it in your body in the same way. So the first stage that we have to go through when we go through the breath is the freeze response, and an ineffective freeze response. So you'll start feeling your body kind of locking in, and you'll start feeling it can be harder. It can be hard to remind yourself to take the breaths because your body's telling you, um, you're scared, you couldn't fight, you couldn't run, so now you have to freeze. But it's crucial to remember that it's your body, that your body has the ability to move through a freeze response. Your body doesn't have to be frozen, you don't have to be stuck. And when you can feel the freeze response and then continue physically moving through it, not just emotionally, but like physically letting your body shake, physically letting your legs move, physically letting your breath continue with this strength and with this rhythm, then you break through the freeze response, and it feels literally like a breaking. And so that's like the ceiling. The first ceiling that you burst through is that, like, if you imagined ice and then just using the breath to just crash through it, then all of a sudden you're in your fight or flight response. And those ones aren't actually scary responses because you're empowered through them, and your body has conviction as it's going through them, and it has the knowledge of its own power. And so usually at that point, then people start feeling their legs want to move, or they'll start feeling their arms want to move. Um, a lot of times it's in the core too. You start seeing like the chest and the abs like rising higher and then like coming back down. You'll see people kind of like curling in and then extending, and because that's them coming into their body's knowledge of emergence and knowledge of power instead of just of frailty.
Mm-hmm.
And so then once you get past that first ceiling, then it's like, I had said this earlier, the first part of it kind of feels like you're pushing a boulder up a hill, and you're like, why am I pushing this boulder up a hill? This is a terrible idea. I could have done anything else. But then you get to the top and the boulder starts rolling down, and it's like, and then the breath, at that point, you're not even consciously thinking about the breath. Your body's just making it. And that's usually what allows you to go to a place of true resolution, because it's recognized its ability and moving through the freeze response, and it's recognized its ability to actually be assertive and to be forward moving instead of just stuck. um, so it's a wild ride. And the other thing that I hear usually people come out of it is they're like, that was 30 minutes. It goes, but once you're in it, it goes by fast because your hippocampus isn't online. It's not
Yeah.
able to tell you where you are in it.
Yeah.
And so then all of a sudden you're kind of like, a cool part to experience and to observe is that once you complete the breath, I don't, I'm not, as a facilitator, even the one that stops the breath for you. Your body stops on its own. So it's like once it's had the shaking and once it's had the moving and once it's had I'll encourage people to make sounds through this off also. Usually we'll have a pillow, and it's just like letting your body scream and roar and howl and say whatever sounds come up, say whatever words come up. And so once that has actually been, it's like having like a really, really deep cry. Your
Mm-hmm.
body just stops, and then it has the just surrender and the softness, and it's able to just rest into itself. And it's then, yeah, when you're coming up out of it, it's like, whoa, like all of a sudden the world looks a little bit different and you see
Mm-hmm.
yourself a little different, and you have a little bit more of an understanding of what your real healing capabilities are.
Yeah.
And once you start feeling that, and once you start actually knowing in your body that it's possible, it's really hard to go back to being stuck because
Yeah.
it's all of a sudden a little bit less of an option.
Yeah. Yeah. It just reminds you that you are your own greatest healer. And you
Mhm.
can really, it's pulling your power back. It's like, oh, actually I can do this,
Mhm.
which is so empowering. Um, Tell us when you did such a beautiful job of letting us know what is happening through the breath and how we're moving through the different trauma responses, the flight and fight and freeze. When we're there, like consciously moving into the trauma, is there a moment where you're asking, or it's just naturally being facilitated within our own self, or we're reprogramming? Is there like a piece where we get to reprogram, so then the memory is still there, yes, but it doesn't have the same charge because we just created a new uh
Yeah.
ending?
Yeah, everybody experiences it a little bit differently. And that, like I said, the first time that I did this breath work, I went into a very specific memory. And so sometimes that'll happen. Sometimes you'll go into the memory and as you start moving through the freeze response, usually in the freeze response, you're in the memory exactly as it is. And then once you start moving into the fight and flight response, then it starts to shift because then your body's taking control in a positive way. It's taking control of what needed to happen so that it can
Mm-hmm.
make that thing true. But not everybody goes into a specific memory. Oftentimes, it's just going into a sensation, like a sensation of abandonment, or a sensation of loss, or a
Mm-hmm.
sensation um, of hurt. And especially when we're dealing with subconscious patterns that began early in our childhood, we don't have we don't have the concrete memory. We just have the gist of it, or we have like the sensation of the memory. And so sometimes it's just we're going to that. We're going back into that feeling of deep grief, or we're going into that feeling of loss, or we're going into that feeling of confusion. And in those cases, it's less of us retraining the memory. It's more of us shifting our perception of who we are without that shroud over us.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of a common one is just the self-worth. We'll have these because sometimes it's not like a shock trauma that we experience. Most more commonly, it's a complex trauma that we're feeling. And so if we've had multiple people at different times in our life show us that for whatever reason we're unworthy, or make us, have that impression of ourselves, um, then we don't have a specific memory to go back to. What we have is this layers upon ourselves that all of a sudden we're able to see and feel. And when we're actually able to move with them and breathe through them, then it's kind of like we're able to blow them off of ourselves. And then suddenly we're not wearing them upon us. Suddenly we're experiencing what it feels like to be free of them, and to be the word I'm thinking of is exposed, which is not quite what I'm looking for, but we have the ability to just be like you walk into the sun after wintertime and you feel what the warmth feels like on your skin again. You're all of a sudden able to see what you feel like without those layers of unworth upon you.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times we just start seeing it differently,
Yeah.
because then we're able to see ourselves in a position of power and in a position of sovereignty, instead of in a position of unlove, I guess. So yeah, everybody experiences it a little bit differently, and I think it's important too that we all have had, micro traumas throughout our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So not everybody who's listening to this you know, has had one of the like a shock trauma, and that's
It's
okay.
like have you heard of like the trauma with the big T versus the little t?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
The little T's are important.
Yeah, they are.
And even people who experience big T traumas, they still have the little T traumas that are there and that really need to be tended to and addressed and nurtured.
Mm-hmm.
So you don't always have to come into this with you like there's no scale for this either. There's no scale for if you deserve to go through an alchemical breath. Like it's just if you are called to it, there's a reason. And we all have had things that are unresolved that our lives would shift if we had the ability to have them resolved.
Yeah.
So it's a really, and like I said, it's a 30-minute breath work that your body can do by itself without any external sources. And it's helpful the first few times to have a facilitator to guide you through it, but you can do it on your own after that. And it's
Mm.
just begin really, really continuing to lean into your body's knowledge, because our bodies are wise, even if we're
Mhm.
not able to see them that way, even if we make mistakes or do things that we feel like are mistakes. Our bodies are wise and they want to be seen, and they want to be held, and they want to see us, and they want to hold us. Um, so that's I love that that's a gift that the alchemical breath brings. And
Yeah.
even people tell me frequently before that they're afraid to do it. And you never have to do anything if it feels like in your body like it's a bad idea. But part of what this does too is it starts to reshape our idea of what fear is. And a lot of times the advice that I give is like, be afraid, but also do it anyway. Because there's a certain amount of, like, once we can be, it's like even going on stage. Um, yeah, you're afraid, but you're going to do it anyway. And the
Yeah.
more times that you do it, the more that you start realizing that, oh, this actually isn't something that has to stop me from doing what feels truest to myself. This is just something that is like, it's like putting up a signpost and saying, are you sure this is the path that you need right now? And the answer can be yes, and the answer can be no. And you're the one who gets to say it, and you're the one who gets to choose. And when the answer is yes, this is something I need, then it can be really a force that allows you to go farther and go more steadily and go with more consciousness. Um, and yeah, it's just muscle memory. The more that we start to see fear as just a question and not a block, the more that we can take its advice when we need it and leave it when we don't need it. So I love that part of it too.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's you touch on a good part or point about having that healthy level of fear. And if there's no fear at all, then that's not good either. There's that very because yeah, when there's that healthy level, it's like that poses the question of like, well, what's on the other side of that? That
Mhm.
there's something there that is a gem waiting to
Yeah.
be discovered. Is this particular breath contraindicated for anybody?
I would say that I'd say not to do it if you're pregnant. And to be mindful of, like, if you have asthma or breathing problems. I don't think it's necessarily like a hard no that you shouldn't do it. But if you know that you have, especially like an athletic type of asthma, you can bring an inhaler with you. You can make sure that you just have something that is going to be, yeah, just something that's there to support you if you need it. Um, Other than that, I can't think of anything off the top of my head. Um, but yeah, anytime if anybody wonders about a certain thing, ask. And I think it's something too that your body knows if you can do it or not.
Mhm.
Um, and it's not so far outside of what it's not something that it's not like running a marathon. You
Right,
don't necessarily need training to do it,
right.
uh, because our body is made to take breaths in this way at times. So I would say in general it's pretty safe. But yeah, if you're pregnant, I wouldn't recommend doing it. You have less lung capacity at that point, also, especially if you're further along. But yeah, usually asthma is the thing. But if you do have asthma, just bring an inhaler and just know what your body's know. We know what our body's abilities are, I think.
Totally. And that's what, like, yeah, I want to continue to drive home into just like this podcast in general and the conversations with the different practitioners that I'm having is that to trust the body, that the
Mhm.
body knows the way. And that's what inspired me to start having these conversations because of, obviously our healthcare system and,
Yeah.
trying to take some of these conversations are taking away sovereignty, and our bodies know what to do
Mhm.
continually.
Uh-huh. Yeah,
Yeah.
we do.
Yeah.
And yeah, and the more we find things like, even subtle breath, the more that we move to things like that, the more we really realize that our body knows its shit. Like it knows what it's doing. And sometimes we're truly we can analyze things so much that we forget that
Yeah.
it has to come from our brain,
Yeah.
and doesn't always.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Should we share with people what we are creating?
Yes, let's do it. Here we go.
Well, Rin and I are going to be offering a very special breathwork alchemy session that will be online over Zoom, which is just like so grateful for technology that we can access these things no matter where you are in the world if you are listening. And we have down December 7th
Mhm.
is when the session will take place. It'll be around 90 minutes. Um, it's happening on a new moon, which that's what kind of brings in my element to the piece, bringing some mystical insights and what we're working with just collectively and how that affects you, the client, individually in this breathwork session. What else do you want to share about it, Ren?
Um, well, yeah, so what we'll do is, yeah, Taylor will go into the nuances of the new moon and the astrological aspects, and we'll go through, a full alchemical breath. And like I said, that breath work is 30 minutes long. And it's the breath work, it's in and of itself is 30 minutes long. And it's just a really fantastic opportunity to break through areas of stagnation, areas of repression, areas of suppression, and really get acquainted with who you are. And when we're moving into shadow season, it doesn't always feel like an opportunity, but it is an opportunity to get to know yourself on a deeper level
Mm-hmm.
and to find the aspects of yourself that can just draw you through, and like the aspects of what make you who you are, and love them, truly, truly love them on a physical level. Um, but yeah, and I love being able to do these on Zoom because then you guys get to be you guys get to make yourselves as cozy as you can, and
Mm-hmm.
you get to have the things around you that make you feel safe, any items around you that bring you comfort, um, and you get to just do it in an environment that you are bringing change into. um, and as Taylor said earlier before we started, then you don't have to drive home afterwards.
Yeah, because I had a driver pick me up after a session with
Yeah.
you just because you do feel a little floaty a little
Yeah.
bit, and plus it's like you enter into a different reality for a time and you kind of come back. It's like you just like after having a baby, there's like this
Mhm.
afterbirth of like, okay, like where am I and what's going on? And I feel really hungry and I feel like I need to lay down and I feel like it's a full spectrum of things. So yeah, to be at home, then that takes care of that. You don't have to worry about an Uber.
and it's nice, and it just really allows you to settle into yourself and to settle into the environment that you're creating for yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
it's they can yeah they're just very cozy to be able to have them at home. And we'll have time in there for us to share if anybody feels like sharing, to journal if anybody feels like journaling, and to just create sacred space for yourself.
Yeah.
um, yeah, we're gonna keep the group kind of small, so that we all do have the time and the safety and the cocoon, to
Yeah.
make us feel just just to make us feel comfortable.
Yes. It's important. Ren and
It'll
I
be
both love small, intimate containers. So this will be one. We're going to invite 10 to join us on this journey. And I will have the information in the show notes where you can purchase a ticket if you would like to join us or and just to know more information about this amazing experience. And or if you want to work with Wren individually, she's also offering remote one-on-one sessions. And where can people find you?
oh yeah. The easiest way is on Instagram. Um, at Wren Quinn on Instagram. You can message me. I mean, my website is on there too. You can, feel like there are so many ways to reach somebody these days. But yeah, and there's something special about doing them in a group, and there's something special about doing them individually. So again, just like trust what you're called for. I love the community of doing these in groups. I love the freedom that enables to know that you're not the only one who's
Yeah.
experienced hardship, and to know that you're not alone.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, that's really, really special. But yeah, and my sessions are pay what you can. So if anybody does want to have an individual session, yeah, those are just pay what you
Mm,
can.
such a
But yeah,
beautiful
I'm
offering.
excited. It'll be a really fun. It'll be maybe fun isn't the right word, but it'll be a really wonderful, illuminating session that we can have together.
Yes. And what I have been learning in my healing journey is that the healing, it can also access just deep portals of pleasure, that it's one and the same. So you have kind of have to go through some of that shadowy dark stuff, but there is over an abundance amount of pleasure on the other side that can be tapped into, because when you choose to actively and consciously say, yes, I want to look at these traumas, or I want to work on these shadows, what's happening is that you are also creating so much more spaciousness in your body and in your life to accept more good things, more pleasure, more abundance, more joy. And that's why I love to do this work. Yeah.
Absolutely. I agree. And they can happen in tandem.
Mm-hmm.
Going through the shadows doesn't mean that there's no pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's been part of my journey that I've had to learn. It's like, no, there's pockets of pleasure everywhere you go. Sometimes it's you're bathing in them, and sometimes it's just like, taking little shots of pleasure here and there. But they're always there. And
Yeah.
that is something that really is unlocked with this breath work too, is just you deserve to feel pleasure, and you deserve to feel comfort, and you deserve to feel warm inside your body,
And safe. You deserve to
and
feel
safe.
safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sometimes we have to blow all of those other things off
Yeah.
that are keeping us from feeling those things, so that we
Yeah.
can be intimate with ourselves.
Yeah. You are such a delight and such a queen. I am so happy to know you. And Wren lives in Kansas City, so I do have some listeners that are that listen to the show that are from Kansas City. And if you are one of those people, she is the gem medicine woman in Kansas City. I was like so grateful to find you. I was like, you exist. Like, I don't know, just
Mhm.
people like you usually like to be on the West Coast. So I was like super, super excited to
That's
find you.
very nice.
And
Yeah, I was excited that you found me. This has been a really nice because you moved right after, I feel like not that long after I saw you in a session, and I was like,
Mhm.
man, I was like, I met this cool person, and now she moved. But yeah, technology is a cool thing, so you still get to be in touch, and I love it.
I know. And you know, I do make annual trips to Kansas City and to visit family. And when I do, I think it would be really lovely if we wanted to collaborate an in-person thing, like
Please, please.
tea and breath work. I would love to do
That
tea and
sounds
breath
awesome.
work.
Love it.
Yes. Thank you so much for being here. And I hope you have a beautiful rest of your evening.
Yeah, you too.